going to go ahead and get started on time. I always hate being between people and lunch, so we'll try to make sure we don't go over. Thank you all for coming. It's more people than I thought. Last night was pretty fun, so appreciate it. So hopefully you're in the right place. This is TypeScript for SharePoint 2013 developers. How many of you know what TypeScript is or have any experience with it? Good, so quite a few of you. How many of you have been deving in the SharePoint Cloud App model? Just either messing around or doing anything? Great. How many of you have experience with SharePoint 2013 other than this week? Quite a few of you. Are you tired of hearing about JavaScript? I saw a few tweets where people said they kind of were, but unfortunately this is a whole lot more JavaScript, so I apologize. But hopefully you'll see it's a different spin on JavaScript, and I myself, I know I struggle with it. I don't code JavaScript, I hack it. So TypeScript kind of helps me do it in a more traditional software development pattern, software engineering, professional developer kind of way. And so hopefully you'll see that at the end of today. So brief introduction, my name is Matt Bremer. I am a SharePoint technology specialist. This is my first trip to the UK, and it's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun. And this conference in particular has been a lot of fun. Since I work for Microsoft, I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of acknowledge our company culture. We invented PowerPoint. So I do feel like I have to start off and get just a few PowerPoint cliches out of the way. So this is something Scott Hanselman did in a talk called It's Not What You Read, It's What You Ignore. It's a very good talk if you want to go do it. But I loved how he did this, so bear with me. We're going to go through it here. So you can expect a lot of random smart art in this presentation, so good. We'll have some full bleed evocative stop photography. Originally was going to use the SharePoint people, but Steve beat me to it in the keynote. So I used a picture of someone yawning because I figure we're all a little slow this morning after last night. And acknowledge, have a popular internet meme that's local to prove to you that I'm kind of hip and cool and a little clever. So is Downton Abbey popular here? Anyone? Are there a bunch of people not from the UK here? Okay. My wife and I like it. All right, so enough of that. Let's get this started. So how many of you are tired of seeing that? This is the most cordial release of SharePoint, isn't it? It's like, oh dear, something went wrong. Or if anybody's on link, it says, enjoy your meeting. So a little bit of whimsy. So why are you here? What should you expect? So first things first, I like interactive sessions. I have some prizes. Mark's got a whole bag full of stuff. Do you still have it? Mark's been kind enough to help me give these things out. It's your usual tchotchkes that we cleaned out the marketing closet at Microsoft, so there's probably enough for everyone in here, so if you don't get something coming up, there's stickers, stress balls, and someone will get a backpack for the best, because you need another backpack after getting one today. But maybe you could have a backpack to carry your backpack. And ask questions, pop up. And I like an interactive session. Let's have some fun. And, this is all still kind of new what I'm doing here, so there might be some questions I don't know. I'll be happy to follow up with you and things like that. So your key takeaways from this is, what is TypeScript? Now, when you leave here, you're not going to be a TypeScript expert, and you're not going to be a SharePoint apps expert. And this is not a session where I'm going to rehash SharePoint apps. I'm sure you've had that drilled into you enough this week. So I'm going to give you a foundation in TypeScript. A lot of you already kind of knew what was going on, so that's good. Why TypeScript for SharePoint apps? So I kind of mentioned it, but alluded to it a little bit. I hack JavaScript. I don't necessarily code JavaScript. And doing large JavaScript apps is hard and become cumbersome. That language really wasn't meant for that. And that's straight from Anders Heilsberg himself, who actually acknowledged that, and who's behind TypeScript, actually. So the inventor of JavaScript is actually behind TypeScript. TypeScript supports the cloud app model. So, of course, I work for Microsoft. I'm going to promote the cloud, right? But it really is kind of the way forward. There's still some things to work out with it, but I'm pleased with the direction it is, and I hope you are too and see the potential, because getting things running outside of SharePoint and letting you choose the platform and the development technologies you want to do kind of really opens it up to a lot of people, makes it more approachable. SharePoint Dev was getting kind of unwieldy, kind of difficult, and things like that. So I think it's a very positive direction, and it'll only continue to improve. And finally, TypeScript is still in preview. It is an open source project. It's actually a true open source project, which is a kind of a first for Microsoft. Before we would do open source type things, but most of the pushes would come from corporate, and if you forked the code, you would get behind and things like that. So this is a true open source project, so it's kind of cool. So I want to go ahead and start with a demo and just kind of show you the benefits of maybe doing a JavaScript app with TypeScript, and just kind of show you the flexibility you have. You don't have to buy all into it. You can kind of, it's really just kind of a runtime thing, so you can pick and choose what you want to do. And because it starts as JavaScript and ends as JavaScript, you don't necessarily have to refactor all of your code that you have. So the basis of my demo, this is the last bit of humor, I promise. There's a funny thing somebody sent to me, what the British say, what the British mean, what I understand. So I chose 3 or 4 phrases that I expect to hear on feedback of this session. So, with the greatest respect, I think you're an idiot. This is a very brave proposal, you're insane. Are these accurate? Anyone? Okay. This seems very interesting. This is clearly nonsense. So, all right. We will go into the demo now. And we did an eye test earlier to see if those in back could see the code okay, so please let me know if you cannot. I'm even demoing on-prem, see how old school I am? All right. So a couple things. I've got one that I've already kind of deployed here, and this is my British translation app. I've even got my little Metro European Castle thing there. And what I do is the permission is on a particular list. So the list here, what this is it's basically a form on top of a list. I believe, how many of you went to Dervish Shadravan's session on Monday, I believe, talking about enterprise form options? Okay, not too many of you, but a few. He directed some people here this way. We did that session at SPC just to kind of give you, so this kind of dovetails on that a little bit if you wanted to investigate, using web forms. And there's even another cool option in LightSwitch that you may want to check out when it comes to web forms. But I find doing pure HTML5 and JavaScript forms easier with TypeScript because, again, it just makes JavaScript a little bit easier. Of course, now it's taking forever to load, so bear with me. So what I've got here, there's just some code that was in a recent MSDN article that I thought was a pretty good example, and it just kind of lays out all the CRUD operations that you would have on a particular list and just gives you kind of a form where you can kind of test everything out. So I've got my create form here. I've got an update for the quantity field, and then I can delete things on here as well. And just real simple stuff. You could obviously enhance it. The great thing about TypeScript is you can actually leverage all the modular libraries that are out there. So like Andrew Connell's in the front row here, he did a session on single page apps, and he leveraged a lot of really cool libraries. You can totally do that with TypeScript, and I'll show you how in a little bit. So just to show you that nothing's up my sleeve here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just create a record. Great, did that. Now I'm using the REST API actually. I prefer that because I can use it outside of SharePoint as well, rather than the CSOM. But you can do either or, and I'll show you the difference in what that means to TypeScript. So there we go. Nothing really interesting there, other than the fact that it's a list form using in a SharePoint app using the REST API. So I'm going to go ahead and pop back into Visual Studio. And so a couple things I want to point out. This is a SharePoint TypeScript enabled project. There is a little bit of work that you have to do that right now, and I'll walk you through what you have to do that. But it looks like a standard SharePoint hosted app. That's all I'm doing here. And what I've got is my regular JavaScript files that I would have in here, the libraries that I'm leveraging. But you might notice a couple different files in the .d.ts, and then also I've got an app.ts for my main logic form. And then I've also got a demo.js where I've got the REST API code, and I want to show you kind of the difference and what the experience would be like, and hopefully you'll see the benefits of leveraging the TypeScript library. A couple other things about the dev environment. I highly recommend you install Update 2. Go and get the latest build of TypeScript at TypeScriptlang.org. And I also leverage a plugin called Web Essentials. And the reason I do that is that it gives me this handy dandy, although not so great when you're got limited space, but it gives me a side-by-side view of my TypeScript code and the JavaScript it's generating. And so that's really what's going on here. There's nothing more magic about this, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself on the sides, and I'll dive into this a little bit more. But again, you're coding. It's not like it's a superset of JavaScript. It's not a new syntax. It's not anything like that. It's very actually C#-like. So if you're comfortable there, you could write TypeScript rather easily. It'll make sense to you. But again, you see I'm mixing some jQuery in with it. Really in this example, I'm just leveraging strong typing for a lot of my variables to kind of help me ensure good code quality. And I could mock test on those if I wanted to and things of that nature. So, but I could refactor this all into strongly typed classes and do things that just you can do in JavaScript, but it's not that easy, and it'll let you do bad things really easily, right? So get yourself into a little bit more of a structured language, not as dynamic, but still leverage all the dynamic aspect and the ubiquitousness of JavaScript. It'll run anywhere essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and get in, and that was the Web Essentials plugin. You can get that through just the download manager, and it has the other thing it does too, before I forget, if you want to go and configure it, the Web Essentials does some interesting things when you install it. You can tell it to actually, if you select the TypeScript in the options, you can tell, if you want to target ECMAScript 3, if you want to add the generated JavaScript files to your project, you can actually have them compile all on build, or you can have them compile on save. And then the great one here is that it'll automatically minify for you as well. Because the TypeScript files aren't actually deployed with the app. They actually are disposed of at deployment, and only the JavaScript files carry forward. So there's no artifacts left behind. It's pretty low cost. In fact, if you wanted to apply this to existing code, it's not like you would do anything really harmful to your existing code. You could back it out quite easily. And that's why I'm okay advocating for you to use it in preview as well. And you just download the plugin to actually get the TypeScript project type within Visual Studio. So enough about that. Let's get into the code. So I have my 4 methods here, my create, read, update, delete, just your standard CRUD. And I've got them, again, I kind of mentioned that I'm using the REST APIs. Sometimes, getting the URLs formatted and, your JSON requests and things like that, it's cumbersome. And I'll show you a little bit how I created a TypeScript definition file to sort of abstract a lot of that and streamline a lot of that and allow you to leverage the RESTful APIs in a more sort of client object model analogous way. So within here, let's see let's try and force an error. So there was one that Mark was doing, we were kind of talking about, and he was adding a string. How many of you have done that and kind of been frustrated, can't find it, and things like that? So that's where a benefit of like TypeScript can really come in handy. What did it take you, about an hour? About an hour to debug. It was a lot of code that he was going through, and he couldn't find it. So if you could have caught that earlier in the application lifecycle, that might have been a lot more efficient and a lot better code, and it wouldn't have been deployed and out there for users to see. So let's go ahead and force it, and then kind of show you the difference. So let me get to my update here.
Thanks for calling me out.
You're welcome, buddy. Got to humble you a little bit. So in here I'm evaluating my control that has the quantity in there. So I'm going to go ahead and add a string to it and do that. So of course now I'm not getting any feedback, right? Because it's not compiling it. It looks okay. It evaluates fine. It's in a decent structure. If I build it, I won't get any errors. Watch, I'll get an error. There we go, I saw it. Build succeeded. Okay, there we go. But if I deploy this, we all know what's going to happen. So let me go ahead and deploy it. And I can attach the debugger. I can bring up Firebug. I can bring up, your tool of choice. The Visual Studio 2012 tools for JavaScript are actually quite good as well. They provide IntelliSense. You can have debugging, things like that. But why? I want to be able to capture that just like I would if it was C#, right, where it just tells me, hey, you can't do this. You're working with a number here. You don't want to add a string. And I could also use closures, or I could use equals, 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 but there's no one good way, right? I just want to do it kind of in the way I'm used to doing with managed code. And that's kind of the benefit that TypeScript will give me. So let me go ahead and just put my number in here. And I made mine real SharePoint friendly too. Like, oops, an error occurred, please try again. So there we go. So that was to be expected, right? But I needed to do that, later on. So again, I can figure out, okay, what went wrong? So I can start tracing it and doing whatever. It's kind of laborious. It's just not just integrated. So let's flip over and do this now. I'm going to go over to my ASPX here, and I'm going to comment out this. And so a couple things here. One, I'm calling app.js, not app.ts, because I'm going to reference the generated JavaScript that it does behind the scenes. That gets a little confusing because when you're doing this, if you're working with it, you will put a breakpoint in the TS file and it will never hit it, and then you're going to get angry. So that is something, but remember, it's not going with it. It's generating the JavaScript for you, and that's why I think the Web Essentials tool is kind of helpful in that regard, in that you see it generating the JavaScript for you. So, and then I also am referencing this sprest.js library. This is the sort of wrapper that we put around the REST API that we could then create our TypeScript definition file off of. We did have to do that manually, but I'm going to give you a link at the end of this session where there's about 150 sort of libraries out there for almost every major jQuery library. There's one for Knockout, things like that. And Andrew told me there may even be one for the SharePoint 2013 CSOM now. So these things are being done by the community. People are also building compiler, like ones that'll generate automatically on libraries. They'll generate the D files for you. So now, when I flip over, now I'm in my TypeScript file here. And so let's go down to that update method. Used to seeing a lot more code on the screen here. All right, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. And so now I've got this little syntax here that actually, where I do a colon, and I've typed that as a number. Now it's not like a float, or it's like the JavaScript types in that you have a number or a string. You've got some pretty basic types here, but you can do arrays and things like that. And then it also has, if you choose not to do one, it'll do an any type. So there's a little bit dynamic there. So I went ahead and done this as a number. So if I go ahead and I start doing now when I build, and you see it immediately highlighted it, and I'll get an error. And so it's telling me right there I've got a type mismatch. And it says cannot convert string to number. And so I've caught it early in the life cycle. I didn't have to deploy it. I didn't have to sit there and how many times do you push a script up and it gets in front of users, and that's when all of a sudden you start finding things. It's one of the downsides of doing application scale JavaScript, is the life cycle's kind of hard to manage. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is, let me go ahead and back that out. So then I have, confidence pretty much when I get it deployed that it's actually, I'm going to avoid a lot of the silly errors that I would make. The other thing I can do, I mentioned before, is, this looks a lot like JavaScript that I had, except for me typing the signatures and things like that. But it looks pretty much like the REST code that I was working with before. And again, you can mix the two. In this case, I wanted to show you can just kind of leverage the typing to kind of give you a little bit more assurance that your code's good. The TFS guys actually put their JavaScript code, their production code, through the JavaScript compiler and typed it, and they found over 150 errors they hadn't found previously. So just doing this alone can actually give you some efficiencies, as well as solve some bugs that you may not be aware of. Everybody see okay? Okay, good. So the other thing you can do is I could go ahead and refactor this code now. and I could put this into a class, and I could have a constructor. And I could go ahead and have it return strongly typed properties and get sets and things like that. So now we can get into a little bit more very disciplined software development patterns and things like that. And you could do test-driven development. You could mock on it and things like that. So this is where I start getting a lot more comfortable because, again, I still kind of hack my JavaScript. I'm getting better, but I mean, it's a lot of frustration for me still. And I much prefer, doing it in kind of a C# way. I may be unique in that, but I tend to find people who are like that. So this makes it a lot more approachable for me, and it still lets me be a pompous sort of compiled code developer on script kiddies. I can kind of dismiss them a little bit. All right, that usually goes either way with a crowd. So, but in here, I declare a variable. I instantiate my my class, and then it's actually returning. It's strongly typed. It's going to tell me the signature. If I do this wrong, it'll go ahead and say, hey, that doesn't match the signature. One other huge benefit too is if I wanted to say refactor this, I can do that as well. And so this is actually probably the best thing. Let's go ahead and say refactor this to British translations. And it went ahead and did all the other references to it. So that is a huge benefit right there. Just another little one you can leverage without having to sort of refactor your code and put everything into these constructs. And again, and it's telling me it doesn't match. So let's go ahead and do this. But then I also get IntelliSense. Now again, like I said, you do get good IntelliSense with Visual Studio 2012, but this does a really good job. And there I've got my properties of meant, quantity, said, understood. So it's a lot, and more analogous to C#. So hopefully that was evident. So let me get you back into PowerPoint now because I do have at least a 20-slide minimum in my Microsoft employment contract. So don't like seeing a black screen. All right. So any questions so far at all? Is that helpful? All right. I don't want to take your question. You know stuff.
So Web Essentials, the TypeScript files be generated by JavaScript, get generated down to JavaScript.
Correct.
And the SharePoint dev tools, if you leave them debugging on the machine, they'll automatically upload JavaScript or image or CSS files to the site so you don't have to go back in and out of the debugger. How does that work with TypeScript? Like, will it still?
It just deploys the JavaScript files.
It'll pick up that change?
It does. I'll show you how I actually wire it up to a pre-compile or pre-build step.
Yeah.
And it does the TypeScript compiler automatically before, so they're there.
Does Web Essentials also go through, well, thanks, and then does Web Essentials also go through and do the automatic?
I have Web Essentials do it at save.
At save, does it at the minification?
Yeah.
Does it also do minification too?
Every time. It's very nice. It helps a lot. And like I said, the split view alone is really what helps. So just a little bit more. What is TypeScript? So, and why did we develop TypeScript? So I kind of mentioned before, Anders Heilsberg was behind this. It's an open source project. So the good part about JavaScript is it offers ubiquity. It works on any device, on any platform, and any browser. Function expressions, and you can do classes and prototyping and things like that. They enable a semblance of OOP, but you can still, and encapsulation and things like that, but you can still do, there's a lot of bad JavaScript out there. I'll just leave it at that. Community projects such as Knockout, jQuery, Modernizer, those have really taken sort of enhanced JavaScript significantly, right? Pretty much anybody anymore, enjoy your stress ball. Pretty much anybody anymore doesn't really write JavaScript. They write jQuery, right? And we've even integrated it fully into SharePoint and things like that. Now the bad. So the fundamental design patterns, even though I kind of mentioned before that you can do them, they're just not, they don't sit there. They require discipline by the dev. They're not, just intuitive. They're not just, out of the box like it would be with a managed way. You can do things badly and it will work. It's dynamic no matter what. So that's always interesting whenever you kind of, all of a sudden have a global variable you didn't mean to do and some script comes behind and, sets it to something. That's always a fun bug to track down. Another benefit that we kind of saw in the demo a little bit is strongly typed code protects a dev from themselves. So it interprets intent, right? It kind of knows you meant to use a number here. You meant to use this type. And just kind of, it interprets intent. You don't get that with a scripting language because it doesn't know until it happens. We kind of mentioned before, JavaScript delays bug discovery. It's further along in the application lifecycle because typically you will deploy it out and then you'll have to debug it, on the server and whatnot. Hopefully you're doing that on a dev server, but sometimes they do make it out. There are numerous idiosyncrasies in JavaScript. Again, I kind of mentioned before with the global variable and just the weird ways that it does things sometimes and why things happen. It's not always very evident, which makes debugging harder. So again, we're not trying to do a new version of JavaScript. So it's a language for application scale JavaScript development. So that's the official marketing Microsoft messaging, right? And an even more Microsoft messaging marketing thing is TypeScript is a type superset of JavaScript that compiles to plain JavaScript. Now this is important because there are some competing products out there like Google Dart and CoffeeScript and things like that. But they only target JavaScript. So we actually start in JavaScript. We're not trying to make a new JavaScript, if you will. We're not going to create another like IE6 issue with CSS here, So how I like to describe it is TypeScript is JavaScript for professional developers. And again, that's not to denigrate people who are web developers, but I just think it brings the more sort of disciplined software engineering skill set to doing these things, and it's becoming more important, right? And so actually, I'm gonna take credit for that. I'm gonna quote myself. So that was me just now. And so those are the official definitions. And so the questions you're probably asking yourself, other than the sayings that I put on the board earlier, going, this is clearly nonsense. But is TypeScript another new implementation of JavaScript with a new syntax I have to learn? You kind of have to learn some syntax, but again, it's very C# like, it's ECMA based, and it's not like a new, it generates JavaScript in the end, so no. And why not support those other endeavors? Well, again, they're not targeting, we're not likely to support Google Dart, but CoffeeScript and things like that, they're not targeting JavaScript, they're trying to replace it, right? And we don't want that, because JavaScript's everywhere, and it runs on everything, and we've actually made all our platforms now have a pretty strong component with the dev story, Windows 8, Office, SharePoint. You've seen it this week, right? A lot of JavaScript. And anyone who goes to take the certs, you're going to need to learn JavaScript. And just ask any of the many Microsoft Certified Solution Masters that we have here this week. Lots of JavaScript. So get comfortable with it. It took me a while too, but as these tools kind of come out, it's getting better. And then the big question everybody wants to know, does it only work in IE? Well, hopefully you're getting the point that it's still JavaScript, so it works in everything. Again, we're not trying to create this new, we're going to charge you an enterprise subscription or something. Once you get it, we're going to lock you in or something like that. So again, this is an official Microsoft product that gives people some concern, the evil empire, but it is true open source, so you should think of it more like this, much more friendly. And it is kind of exciting. It is true open source. Yeah, I got a question. It could, JavaScript's ever evolving. The way Anders basically described it, and I encourage you to go to TypeScriptlang.org, there's a good video there where he kind of talks about it, but JavaScript was never really designed to be this application scale language that it is today. In fact, everyone behind it is actually surprised at what it's become. So I don't know, I think they're gonna approach it like this, where you're gonna have a superset, and JavaScript is just what it is at this point. Because you've got all the libraries and people that have enhanced it, again, like with Knockout or Modernizer or jQuery and things like that. So I don't think that will be the case, but you never know. Any other questions? Okay, so again, it is true open source. The open source license allows the code to be forked. Community can enhance the tooling over time. We support not just Visual Studio, there's a plugin for Node and things like that. So a lot of great support. So I know I'm hammering it home here, but this is important. TypeScript is a type superset of JavaScript that compiles to plain JavaScript. So again, it targets JavaScript, it ends in JavaScript, enough said. Any browser, any host, any OS, open source. So this is an IE only thing. It's not Microsoft trying to monopolize it and monetize it and things like that. We want to preserve the good of JavaScript while addressing the bad. So just a few more slides. You kind of saw before, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to leverage. So you can do optional static types, classes, and modules. I feel like if I'm going to do new development, I'll probably start there and do stuff in that regard. But I think what I do as a shim is with the legacy code is I bring it over and I'd probably type a lot of the variables and things like that just to get the type safety, just to increase that code quality, especially on a big application and things like that. Zero cost. They completely disappear at runtime. It's purely a development time facility. So you can pick and choose, again, how much you want to do it. And just a little bit more formalization of JavaScript's types. So again, we're not making new types here, right? We're not giving you more power. We're not giving you all the typing you would have available, say, in a language like .NET. But we're making them formal. We're gonna have some type inference and some structural typing. And again, it works with the existing JavaScript libraries. So I kind of showed you before. I got that D file, and I'll bring that up in a little bit because I'm actually going to build one of these apps with TypeScript, so you know all the pieces involved of what you have to do. And basically, all you do is you put like an interface wrapper on top of the library in a format that TypeScript can understand, and it formalizes all the classes and things like that, and all the types. So even though we're talking about that it is sort of type safe, it's not provably type safe, right? So it's not like a strong compiled language and things like that. But they do reflect intent, and so it does help you increase your code quality, but it just doesn't provide guarantees. So still, test. Don't rely on it. Oh, it built. Don't get that. You still got to be very disciplined and very cognizant of the things, but it will help you along. And then again, the scalable application structuring, you could really do sort of some reusable code, some nice patterns here. And when you put it into, say, a framework like SharePoint 2013, where you can actually distribute those apps then very easily and make them discoverable and whatnot, and you can deploy them to the SharePoint store if you want to. And in SharePoint hosted apps, you can only use JavaScript, so you can't use any sort of full trust code or managed code. You can with like a provider hosted app or a auto-hosted app, but SharePoint hosted app, you're locked down to JavaScript. So just 2 more slides. Why TypeScript for SharePoint apps? And so I am going to give you, so how many of you are familiar with the SharePoint Cloud App model? Probably pretty familiar with it by now. So over half the room, but I'll just go through it. SharePoint hosted, we talked about. Only SharePoint components, client-side code, app web required. Auto-hosted is pretty cool. I think that one's not being leveraged enough. You can have an instance of an app in Azure. It can be on any platform. It could be PHP. So that's kind of interesting, communicating with SharePoint no-auth. I actually have some enterprise customers doing some very interesting things with auto-hosted apps and line-up business systems, as well as provider-hosted apps, which are on-premise or our cloud, choice of platform. These are ones you could actually have run on completely other infrastructure and integrate with SharePoint via OAuth and whatnot. So I think there's going to be a lot of potential once people realize how to harness that. And I think it's more accurate to think of SharePoint 2013, whereas in the past we used to think of it as an application platform. I think it's probably more realistic to think of it as a services bus now, or going in that direction. So it's a good mindset to keep in mind. And then finally, what do your SharePoint app UX options look like? You can have the immersive full page, kind of like AC did with the single pane app. You can have a part, your traditional web part, or you can have the custom actions and things like that. So let's go through building one of these things. Any questions? Am I going too fast? Do you want to go to lunch? Okay. Go ahead.
You showed us this example. You had a class and a constructor, and the parameters were strongly typed, and it warns you if you make a mistake. Can I adopt TypeScript but have like the C# dynamic type and have, I don't know, declare 3 parameters out of 4 in a strict way, but leave the 4th parameter, for example, as a dynamic way?
Yeah, you should be able to. Yeah, I've done some stuff like that. And there's a way you can overload them too, if you wanted to do it that way. But yeah, you should be able to. Because at the end of the day, it's dynamic, right? So it's a dynamic language, so you should be able to. I don't have an example that does that. Let me go ahead and jump in. So let's build one of these. All right, so we're going to go and fire up a new instance of Visual Studio. And if you haven't installed the RTM tools, they were released to web about a month and a half ago, and you no longer need to run as administrator, so it's kind of nice. I'm going to do a new project. And so this is the part that I'll definitely want you to sort of pay attention to. Because this is where it's a little kludgy. Or, wait, I'm in the UK. It's dodgy. It's a little dodgy. I'm going to choose SharePoint hosted. I am on my local instance. How many of you configured a app deployment on an on-prem environment? Anyone? A few of you? Read the documentation. I spent about a half a day on a DNS issue yesterday. It's not that trivial. Any other questions while we're waiting for Visual Studio? Anyone? Yep.
Whenever I see any abstraction over an existing technology, I always wonder, is there anything I'm missing out on from the original? Is there anything notable that I can't achieve in this that I would have to jump into JavaScript to do instead?
No, because you can just do JavaScript if you want to. So if you had something that you wanted to say, you had a really elegant solution, say in jQuery or in JavaScript or something like that, you could leave it alone and it would work fine. And then you could take advantage of TypeScript for just other aspects, or you could just take advantage of the typing on that solution there.
You've painted a very, very positive picture today. Is there anything negative you would say about this?
I have found nothing negative. This is a recorded session, and honestly, the only negative thing for me is it's JavaScript. So, yeah, and it's not, there's one. It's preview. So, I mean, you run into stuff. And this is going to be a negative here in just a second. I'll show you what you have to do for a SharePoint project. So, I've got my SharePoint project. I've got my structure. You know, it's just an auto-hosted app. I've got my app manifest that I'd want to do and assign permissions. So I'm going to actually go ahead and take care of that. Because that's the first thing I like to do, because I always forget it. Give it full control. Let's go ahead and save that. And now comes the hard part. So now I'm going to unload this project. It's shades of STS dev all over again. Let's edit this. And thanks, Andrew. Let's turn on presenter mode, shall we? Windows 8. Where are you? Mobility Center. I know you're there. Why don't I see it? I'm wasting time. All right, no Twitter bombing me right now while I'm up here. So I've got my project file here, and there's a couple of things I need to do. I'm going to pop over to my other solution here. And I'm going to unload this project because I don't ever remember it and I need to cut and paste it. But Rob Bogue, SharePoint MVP, actually has a good blog post. It's a little out of date, and I'll point out the, why aren't I seeing it? Down, thank you. See, I'm used to seeing a whole lot more screen there. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. He's got a good blog post that walks through, and I've got a slide in here that kind of shows all the little parts you have to do. So let me go ahead and edit this. So the first thing you have to do is you have to go over and grab this initial targets folder here. So let me pop over to my new one. I'm going to go over there, and that's in that top project declaration right here. So I'll put that in. So we're good there. And then the second thing I have to do, and this is the bit dodgier one, is I need this build action. And so where it differs from Rob's post, Rob and he did most of the work. worked on this before our sessions at SPC in November, and it was like the first version of TypeScript when it was released. We're on, there's been something like 5 or 6 releases since then. So they've kind of gotten smarter about some things. Where's that at? Under project, okay. And so then I'm just gonna go ahead and, I just pasted at the top here, just under that one. And so the difference being, there used to be a version number in this path here to the TypeScript compiler, and that's no longer necessary. You just do the /TypeScript TSC. This works on 64-bit, 32-bit, whatever the case may be. The compiler is actually written in TypeScript as well. And you just pop those in, we save it. Okay, we now have a SharePoint project, and I reload the file. Yep. Wired up for TypeScript. So this will actually do the builds for our JavaScript. But we also have the web solutions going on, so it minifies it and things like that. You definitely have to do this step. The Web Essentials step is optional, but I think it adds a lot to it. So the next thing we'll want to do is, in this case, I want to go ahead and I want to bring in my other files that I have. I have the jQuery shim, which is actually in the TypeScriptlang.org site, and you can download it with the source code, and you can get the jQuery shim. I'm just going to bring it over from my other project there. So the files I'm looking for are sprest.js, sprest.d.ts, my definition file, and then my jQuery definition file as well. Go back to documents. Kind of a low-tech way to do it, but it works. Okay, there we go. So I am doing that. I'm going to go ahead and add those. Add those to my project. And so now this one gets a little weird. I'm going to actually delete my app.js, or actually what I like to do, just rename it old. Deleting always makes me nervous, right? So .old. Yep. Cool. All right. And so now I'm going to replace that with a TypeScript file. And the reason I'm going to add a real TypeScript file is so it does the minification accurately for me. So I've got that template installed, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to name this app.ts. Am I going too fast? You guys following along? All right. And so now what's interesting is I'm in my app.ts. You see it immediately brought over the, there's a lot going on in that window right now. I know you can't see it. I'll close this. But I want to show this. And so it did the little stub of the JS, but I haven't saved it yet, so it hasn't done the minification. And so if I make a change and I save it, and you see I'm getting an output that it's compiling the TypeScript. There, it went ahead and generated the minified file for me. So just to prove that it's working, appropriately. And then the other thing we can do here is we can go ahead and build and make sure that that goes up with our SharePoint app. And so now we're wired up and ready to start plugging in our code. And then the other thing I need to do now is I need to go to my app.ts, and there's a couple of things, since we're referencing in our default page here, app.js, we're okay. We don't have to change that, because that's why I like to rename it to app.ts, because we're already wired up then. I don't have to do anything because it's going to generate that file for me anyway. In fact, I should probably change it to the minified one, right? It's already wired up. I'm good to go. And then a couple other things I need to do. I need to make my references to my REST library. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those. Is the hunger setting in yet? Is everyone feeling last night? All right. Nobody's asking questions. Mark, just start chucking stress balls, man. Go ahead.
I think you rightly before when you said you could kind of use TypeScript as like a static analysis tool for your existing JavaScript.
Right.
So that's like another use to it, even if you're not using that.
I
You can check, you can use it as a tool.
I think that's probably one of the more. I think it's a good learning step, and I think it's enlightening to kind of do that. I've caught a lot of stuff in some JavaScript that I code, and I mentioned the TFS team because that's a real engineering team doing that, and they did it, and they were shocked at what they found. So I totally think that's a valid use case and actually a great one to kind of do learning. So I smell a blog post with your SPA library. So I'm farming it out. Oh, what happened? Oh, I need to steal more code. All right, so the other things here, let me go over here. Bring up the default. So I need to make my reference to my SP REST library. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Good, and then the last thing I need to do is I need to get back in my TypeScript library. Let me go ahead and shut this down because that gets a little crazy.
I have a quick question about this with you.
Yeah.
Can you edit either side?
No. If anyone was at my session at SPC, I found that out rather quickly when it was full screen like this, and I'm going, I can't do anything. Nothing better than 500 people in your room, and nothing's working. But we figured it out quickly, so yes, you cannot edit the right side. Go ahead and give yourself one, but throw it at yourself really hard. So the last thing here, let me go back to my original, and let me bring up my TS file. And I'll show you there's a unique type of reference up here. These are referencing my definition files, and I just put that at the top of my TS. I totally expect at some point there will just be a template for this. But it's not a lot of steps, right? I mean, it's some stuff you got to remember, but it's not horrible. And in 5 minutes you're wired up. And so now I'm ready to go. I'm ready to build my SharePoint TypeScript app. And it's got this example code in here of giving you sort of the classes and the modules and the constructors and the interfaces. And then the other thing I kind of told you I wanted to show was the definition file. So this is the SP REST file. And again, it's just like a wrapper, and it's just creating modules and interfaces for the typing within the REST module, but it does do almost all. I mean, that's why it's daunting, right? You see somebody creating, say, a type definition for the CSOM or even the REST library. There's a lot there. So what I've seen a lot of people do is just do it for the stuff you use, and then contribute that way to the community and say I did the most popular 10 things or something like that. That's what people are doing. But there really are a lot out there. There's I think it's well over 100, 150 now. So, and I'll give you that link at the end. But that's all it looks like. It's just kind of like a stub, if you would. So TypeScript knows, and it can interpret that type and work with it and things like that. That's all there is to it. You're ready to develop a SharePoint app with TypeScript at this point. So you can go through and have your CSOM code like I had. If I go back over, and I've got a lot of my REST code in here. It's just doing the example code that I downloaded from MSDN. I tweaked it a little bit to match my stuff, but I just went ahead and put it in here. I didn't change it much. I just did the typing, as that gentleman mentioned, and check things out, and then just showed some examples and things like that. So it's real easy to get going on it and get started. It's even easier, I kind of mentioned before, it's a little tough to do app domain isolation on an on-premise machine, but you can sign up for a dev account in Office 365. I know, Microsoft pushing the cloud, but it really is easy, and you're up and running in minutes, and you don't need a SharePoint 2013 infrastructure if you don't have one. And I highly recommend a laptop with 32 gig if you're going to do it. My dev farm's 5 servers, so doing that. All right. Any other questions before I get out of Visual Studio? Yep, go ahead.
A couple questions. So the triple axis of it, is that expression syntax or?
It is. That's the reference to my definition files, so it brings that sort of namespace in, if you will.
Or would you just be sure not to put
Right, it's not XML documentation or anything like that. Yeah, that's a good point.
And the other thing was the jQuery definition file that that's a special file that's generated by TypeScript.
It is. They went ahead and did that one on the TypeScript.lang.org site. I'll pop that one open, and it kind of tells you this is what Microsoft did. They're going to continually update this because that's by far and away the most popular library. And I do think you'll see an official one for Knockout. But what you're actually seeing is people build generators, which makes sense, right? And then as they're doing that, they'll make the definitions for it. But that's what's great is you can leverage all that great stuff, but have the type safety and the patterns and things like that to do that. You're not limiting yourself at all to do those things. No problem. All right. The last gasp of PowerPoint, but I have links and stuff for you, so it'll be worthwhile. And we're going to get out on time, so that's all that matters. So just kind of the flow a little bit again, if you want to leverage TypeScript in a SharePoint app, and if you want to, I think they make the decks available, I'm not sure, but if not, you can reach out to me on Twitter or something. But, unload the project, make your, edit the project file, make the initial targets change, make your build action, and then reload the project, and that gets you wired up. And then those other steps there just to kind of get you settled. Couple other things. TypeScript is in preview. The compiler is open source. It's written in TypeScript. Tooling, Visual Studio plugin, Node.js package. I think you're going to see more and more. I don't think there'll be like a Notepad plugin, but maybe, you never know. Notepad++ maybe. Libraries, DOM, jQuery, Node.js, WinRT. Pretty much a lot of our libraries are coming up to speed, like Windows 8 and things like that. And a lot more. Lots of stuff going on with this. This is actually kind of the very cool thing is the community's really latched onto this. It was just launched in like the last week of October. Over 2,100 Codeplex posts, 80 forks, 600 Stack Overflow questions. There's a huge ecosystem. That number's growing all the time. And you've got support in the native tools, Ruby, Grunt, not just our stack. We're really trying to leverage that sort of open source feel to it. So again, application scale JavaScript development is hard. TypeScript makes it easier. Hopefully you saw that today and how it can help you in SharePoint. TypeScriptlang.org. They have great tutorials. They even have a playground where you can work with example app or scripts and see how it generates and see how it behaves. There's example reference architectures out there, even complicated ones that do like rasterizing and all sorts of crazy stuff. So you can do that. And then, again, we're not trying to build a new and improved JavaScript. We built it to preserve the good of JavaScript and while addressing the bad. And hopefully it is comforting that Anders is behind this and on board with this. This is his new project. He's not going to do anything to negatively impact JavaScript. Plus, he's brilliant, so he'll figure it out. And finally, because I'm kind of a clown, if you don't believe me, just ask Angry Kitty. And to get started, TypeScriptlang.org. SharePoint apps, if you haven't had that thrown at you a lot this week. SharePoint app, TypeScript integration workaround, that's the blog post for the thing. Just be mindful that it is slightly different with the version number on that. So just be aware of that. And then the TypeScript library definition, that's probably the most important link on here, and I've given you a shortened URL on that. That's where all the definition files are there. Was that a question or you? Okay, he wants swag. Right on. Question?